The nail gun jammed on the third shot. I was kneeling on a subfloor in a half-finished duplex on Ridgeway, sweat in my eyes, sawdust in places sawdust shouldn't be, when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. I ignored it because phones buzz and it never matters. I cleared the jam, fired 2 more nails, and the phone buzzed again. I pulled it out with my left hand, the one that wasn't holding a tool. Margaret Whitfield. I stared at the name. The screen went dark. Then it lit up again, the same name, like she knew I'd looked and decided not to answer. Margaret Whitfield was my ex-girlfriend's mother. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. I hadn't spoken to Sarah in 2 years either. But that was different. Sarah was someone I used to date. Margaret was someone I used to belong to. I answered. "Benjamin," she said, drawing the word out the way she always had. She was the only person alive who called me Benjamin. And she said it the way you'd say the name of a street you'd lived on a long time ago. Familiar, but careful. Like she wasn't sure it still led to the same place. "Hi, Margaret. I need a favor. My fence fell down in that storm last month." I called 3 contractors, and they all wanted $4,000, which is more than I paid for my first car. Walt would have done it himself, but Walt isn't here anymore, so I'm calling you. She said it flat. No pause for sympathy, no opening for me to say, "I'm sorry about Walt," which I'd already said at the funeral 2.5 years ago, standing in the back row in a suit that didn't fit right because I'd lost weight and hadn't noticed. "I can come look at it," I said. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll have coffee." She hung up before I could say anything else. Margaret had never been much for goodbyes. She ended conversations the way she ended meals, by standing up from the table when she was done. I put the phone back in my pocket and knelt there on the subfloor for a minute, nail gun in one hand, staring at the framing around me, 2x4s and plywood, and the smell of pressure-treated lumber. I understood these things. Wood was simple. You measure it, you cut it, you fasten it to something. It doesn't ask questions. It doesn't call you Benjamin after 2 years of silence and say your name like a street she used to live on. I need to back up. My name is Ben Corwin. I'm 34. I do residential renovation, which means I tear things apart and put them back together for people who can afford to have someone else do it. I'm good at the tearing apart. I'm getting better at the putting together. I work alone most days. I have a truck, a table saw, a set of chisels I inherited from my grandfather, and a 1-bedroom apartment in Keswick that smells like joint compound, no matter how many times I clean. Sarah and I were together for 3 years. We met at a hardware store, which sounds like something I'd make up, but it's the truth. She was buying picture hooks. I was buying caulk. She asked me which anchors worked best for plaster walls, and I gave her a 10-minute answer that included a demonstration with a piece of drywall I found in the returns bin. She told me later that she'd already known the answer. She just wanted to see if I'd keep talking. I did. For 3 years I kept talking. The breakup was quiet. That's the thing about endings that don't come with a fight. They're harder to explain to people because there's nothing to point at. No thrown plates, no ultimatums, no third parties. We just reached the end of something, and neither of us had the words for what came next. One Tuesday in October, she told me she thought we wanted different things. And I agreed because she was right, and by Thursday, I was packing boxes, while she sat on the kitchen floor, eating ice cream from the container, with a look on her face that wasn't sadness. It was something quieter, like relief or exhaustion, the kind you feel when you finally stop carrying something heavy and realize your arms have been shaking for months. I moved out. She kept the apartment. We split things up the way adults do, which means we were polite about it, and neither of us got what we wanted. That was 2 years ago. What I didn't tell anyone, and what I'm telling you now, is that losing Sarah was manageable. Losing Margaret was the thing that kept me up at night. Margaret Whitfield was 61 when I met her. She's 63 now. She was married to Walt for 37 years, raised 2 daughters in a house on Claremont Drive with a backyard garden that won the neighborhood competition 4 years running. She taught high school English for 20 dating Sarah. Before I started dating Sarah, I met her on a Sunday. Sarah drove me to her parents' house for dinner, and I was nervous the way you're nervous when someone's family is about to decide whether you're good enough. I'd worn a collared shirt. I'd brought wine, a red, because Sarah said her parents preferred red. I shook Walt's hand too hard, and Margaret noticed and didn't say anything about it for 3 months, until one Christmas when she told the story to the whole table, and everyone laughed, and I laughed too, because by then I was allowed to. That's what Margaret did. She let you into the joke. She let you into the kitchen. She let you into the family, like it was a room she'd already set a place for you in. Like the chair had been empty, and she'd just been waiting for the right person to sit down. She taught me to cook, not in a formal way, not lessons with recipes and measurements. She'd call me on a Saturday and say, "Benjamin, I'm making soup. Come stir." And I'd drive over, and she'd hand me a wooden spoon and talk me through it, while Walt sat in the living room watching golf with the volume too loud. She made a beef stew that I've never been able to replicate. The trick was the bay leaves, she said. 3, not 2. And you take them out after 40 minutes, or they turn bitter. I wrote it down on a napkin, and I still have that napkin in a kitchen drawer. She remembered my birthday. My own mother forgot it twice in the last decade, but Margaret never did. She'd call at 7 in the morning and sing the first line of the birthday song, off-key, and then say, "Come to dinner, I made cake." And I'd go every year for 3 years. I went to Margaret's house on my birthday and ate cake that was slightly overcooked because she always set the oven 10 degrees too high and refused to believe the thermometer. When Walt was alive, the house on Claremont was the kind of place that made noise. Not loud noise, life noise. The TV in the living room and the timer on the oven. Walt talking back to the golf commentators. The screen door opening and closing. Feet on the porch steps. Margaret singing something in the kitchen she'd heard on the radio that morning. I spent more holidays at that house than at my own parents'. My family is fine, they're just not warm. They love each other from a comfortable distance, the way you love a painting you keep in the hallway. You notice it when you pass by, but you don't stop. Margaret's house was the kind of place where you stopped, where you sat down, where someone handed you a mug and asked how your week was, and waited for the real answer, not the fine one. Fine is what I told everyone after the breakup. Fine is the word you use when you don't want follow-up questions. I didn't call Margaret after Sarah and I split. I wanted to. I picked up my phone a dozen times in the first month. But what do you say to a woman who treated you like a son when her daughter is the one you couldn't hold on to? It felt greedy, like I was trying to keep the best parts of a life I'd lost the right to. Sarah was the door, and Margaret was the room behind it, and once the door closed, I didn't know how to be in that room anymore. So I stopped trying. 2 years of silence, no calls, no visits, no stirring soup on Saturdays, no birthday cake at 7 a.m. I thought about her at least once a week, and I did nothing about it every single time. Walt died 8 months after Sarah and I broke up. Heart attack early on a Wednesday morning. Sarah called to tell me, which was kind of her. I went to the funeral. I stood in the back. Margaret saw me from the front pew and nodded once, and her face did something I can't describe. Something between gratitude and grief, and something else I didn't have a name for. I left before the reception because I didn't know where I belonged. I didn't call after that either. I drove to Margaret's the next morning. The route was the same. Left on Maple, right on Broad. Straight through 2 lights, left on Claremont. I'd driven it 100 times. The trees were the same. The mailboxes, the driveways, the crack in the sidewalk near the Hendersons' place that had been there since. Before I knew this street existed, all of it the same. But my chest felt different. That tight feeling you get when you're walking towards something you left behind, and you're not sure it still wants you there. Her house was a white Cape Cod, with green shutters and a wraparound porch. The garden was immaculate. That was the first thing I noticed. Hydrangeas along the front walk, tomato cages in the side yard, a row of marigolds, so even they looked measured. Someone was keeping this garden alive, someone with time and care, and the kind of attention that borders on devotion. The porch steps creaked the way they always had, 3rd one from the bottom. Walt had been meaning to fix it for 6 years. He never did, neither did I. Margaret opened the door before I knocked. She was smaller. That's the thing that hit me first. Not shorter. Smaller. The way people get when the space around them has gotten too large. Like the house had expanded and she'd stayed the same size, and now there was too much room between the walls and the person living inside them. Her hair was shorter, too. Cut close. More gray than I remembered. She wore a blue cardigan with the sleeves pushed up. And she looked at me the way she'd looked at me from the front pew at Walt's funeral. That nameless expression. I still didn't know what to call it. "Benjamin," she said, and then looked me up and down. "You look thin. You look good, Margaret." "I look 63, she said. "Come inside." The kitchen smelled like coffee and something baked. Banana bread. Maybe. The counters were clean. The table was the same oak table where I'd sat 100 times, where Walt used to spread the newspaper out and read the sports section out loud to no one in particular. 2 mugs sat on the counter by the coffee maker. I watched Margaret reach for them, then stop. She looked at the mugs for a second. Then she picked up one and put the other back in the cabinet. The motion was small, practiced. The kind of thing you do 50 times before you stop reaching for 2. She poured coffee into the single mug and handed it to me. "Black," she said. "You still take it black." It wasn't a question. She poured herself a cup in a different mug, the yellow one with the chip on the handle, and sat down across from me. The chair at the head of the table was empty. Walt's chair. It was angled slightly toward Margaret's, the way it had always been, like he was still turning to say something. "So," she said, "the fence." She walked me out through the back door. The yard was as tended as the front. Raised beds with lettuce and kale, a bird bath that had been there since before I knew her. The pear tree Walt planted the year their second daughter was born. The fence was along the back property line. I saw it and stopped walking. 3 panels were down flat in the grass. 2 more leaned at angles that defied physics. The posts were dark with rot, soft when I pressed my thumb into one. The crossbeams had separated from the uprights in places where the nails had rusted through. A section near the far corner had come apart completely, the boards scattered like someone had kicked them. This wasn't storm damage. This was years of neglect, of wood left untreated, of posts that should have been replaced a decade ago. The storm had just been the last push. I walked the full length of the property line, 40 feet, give or take. Every post was compromised. Every panel needed replacing. The concrete footings had cracked in 2 places. One post wobbled when I grabbed it, the base crumbling in the soil like wet chalk. 3 days, I said, minimum. I'll need to pull every post and reset the footings. Margaret nodded. She was standing on the back porch with her coffee, watching me the way she used to watch me stir soup, patient and unhurried, like she already knew what I'd find. "You'll stay for lunch," she said. That also wasn't a question. I went back inside with her. The kitchen was warm, and the banana bread was cooling on a wire rack, and the empty chair was still angled toward hers. Margaret set plates on the table, 2 of them, without hesitation, like she'd been setting 2 places for years, and the muscle memory was still running. She put a fork on each plate, then she paused. She looked at the second plate like she was remembering something, like the math was correcting itself in her hands. She didn't move the plate. She left it there and sat down across from me. "You'll need lumber," she said. "I'll give you the credit card." "I'll cover it, Margaret." She looked at me over her coffee. The look was gentle and firm and left no room. "You'll let me pay for my own fence, Benjamin." I ate banana bread at the oak table and drank black coffee from a mug she'd pulled from the cabinet alone. The house was quiet in a way it had never been when Walt was alive. No television, no screen door, no golf commentators being corrected by a man who'd never played around in his life. Just the clock in the hallway and the refrigerator hum, and Margaret sitting across from me like 2 years of silence had been one long-held breath that she'd just let go. I didn't know why I'd come. That's not true. I knew why she'd called. She needed a fence. But I didn't know why I'd said yes so fast, or why driving down Claremont had made my chest tight, or why the empty chair at the head of the table felt like it was waiting for me to say something I didn't have the words for yet. I finished the coffee. I told Margaret I'd be back in the morning with lumber and tools. She walked me to the porch and stood there while I went down the steps, and the third one creaked the way it always had. And I thought about Walt meaning to fix it and never getting around to it. And I thought about all the things we put off because we think there's time. I got in my truck and sat there for a minute, with the engine off. Margaret was still on the porch. She raised her mug toward me, not waving, not saying goodbye. Just acknowledging, the way you nod at someone you haven't given up on yet. I started the engine and drove home. The route was the same. Left on Claremont, through 2 lights. Right on Broad, left on Maple. The same trees, the same mailboxes, the same crack in the sidewalk. But something sat different in my chest now. Not lighter, just different. Like a room I'd locked had a door cracked open, and light was getting in, thin and quiet, and I wasn't sure yet whether to close it again or walk through. I had lumber to buy. I had footings to pour. I had 3 days of work on a fence that should have been replaced years ago for a woman who still set 2 mugs on the counter every morning and put one back. I didn't know what I was walking into. I just knew I was done walking away from it. I got to Margaret's at 7 the next morning. The sun was barely up. The street was still. I parked behind her Buick and sat in the truck for a second, looking at the house. The porch light was off, but the kitchen window was lit. She was already awake, probably had been for hours. I unloaded the lumber first. Cedar boards, 4x4 posts, bags of quick-set concrete, a box of galvanized screws. I carried everything around the side of the house to the backyard and stacked it near the first rotted post. The grass was wet. My boots left prints. Margaret came out at 7:15 with coffee. She didn't say good morning. She set the mug on the porch railing, nodded once, and went back inside. I heard the screen door close behind her. That was the pattern. She'd bring something out, leave it, disappear. No small talk, no hovering, just the quiet insistence that I be fed and hydrated whether I asked for it or not. I started with the worst post. The one on the far end, near the property line where her yard met the neighbor's. I grabbed it with both hands and it came out of the ground like a rotten tooth. The concrete footing crumbled when I pried it loose. Dark soil underneath, soft and damp, full of grubs. I dug the new hole 18 inches deep. That's the rule for a 4-foot fence. Half the post height below grade, packed in concrete that sets in 20 minutes, if you mix it right. I'd done this 100 times on job sites, strip malls, backyards, property lines for people I'd never see again. This was the same work, cedar and concrete, and the weight of a post hole digger in the morning. It didn't feel the same. Margaret came back at 8:30. Sweet tea this time, in a tall glass with ice and a sprig of mint she'd cut from the herb garden near the back steps. She set it on the railing next to the empty coffee mug. "You're making progress," she said. I had 1 post in the ground and another hole dug. Sweat was running down my neck. My shirt was sticking to my back. "It goes faster once the first one's set," I said. "You need that reference point. Everything else lines up from there." Margaret looked at the new post, standing in its fresh concrete, plumb and straight against the morning sky. She looked at it longer than a fence post deserved. "Walt would have done it that way," she said. "Reference point first. He always said, you can't build a straight line from a crooked start." She said it in present tense. Would have, not used to, not did. Would have. Like he was somewhere nearby considering his options. Like he might still walk around the corner of the house in his khakis and his old Virginia Tech cap and tell me I'd mixed the concrete too wet. She caught herself. Her mouth tightened for a second. Then she picked up the empty coffee mug and went inside. I let her go. Some corrections aren't yours to make. By noon, I had 3 posts set and the old ones stacked in a pile near the garage. My arms ached. My hands were raw from the post hole, digger the wooden handles, wearing through the calluses I thought were thick enough. I'd taken my shirt off around 10 because the sun was brutal, and the humidity was the kind that sits on your skin, like a second shirt you didn't ask for. Margaret brought lunch at 12:15. Turkey sandwiches on wheat bread, cut diagonal, with a pickle on the side. She brought it on a tray with cloth napkins. Not paper ones, but actual cloth, ironed with creases. The woman ironed napkins for a man digging holes in her backyard. I washed my hands at the garden hose and sat on the porch steps. The 3rd step creaked when I sat down. I thought about Walt again. How many times had he sat on this step with his lunch, looking at this yard, thinking about the list of things he'd get to eventually. "Eat," Margaret said. She sat in the wicker chair near the door, with her own plate balanced on her knee. We ate in quiet for a while. A cardinal landed on the bird bath and dipped its head twice, then flew off. The hydrangeas along the side of the house were deep blue, almost purple, the kind of color that comes from acidic soil. Margaret's soil was perfect, because Margaret's garden was perfect, because tending things was how Margaret survived. I'd noticed it already. The raised beds were weeded down to bare earth between the rows. The lettuce was planted in lines so straight. They looked measured with a string. The tomato cages were tied with green twine at exactly the same height. The marigolds along the border were dead-headed, every spent bloom pinched off, every plant shaped and tended like it mattered more than a flower should. This was grief with a schedule. This was a woman who couldn't control the empty chair at the head of her table, so she controlled the distance between her kale plants. I didn't say any of that. "Your garden looks good," I said. Margaret looked out at the yard. "It keeps me honest," she said. "Plants don't lie to you. They either grow or they don't. You either watered them or you didn't." She paused. "Walt always said I loved the garden. More than him," she said. Then her voice shifted. Just slightly, the way a guitar string sounds different when you tighten it half a turn. "He says that because I won't let him plant his tomatoes too close together." She caught the tense as soon as it left her mouth and went quiet, looking at the sandwich on her plate. This time she didn't correct herself. She just took another bite. "I've been doing that," she said after a while. "Talking about him like he's still here." "I know," I said. She looked at me, and her eyes were dry. This was something past. Crying. The part where grief becomes grammar, where the person you lost lives inside the tense of your verbs, and you keep catching yourself conjugating them wrong. "It's been 14 months, she said. Some mornings I wake up and I reach for the other pillow, not because I forget, because my arm remembers before my brain does. I nodded. I didn't have anything useful to say about that. I'd never lost someone the way she'd lost Walt. The closest I'd come was losing Margaret herself, and here I was eating her sandwiches. She straightened up in the chair. "Enough of that," she said. "Tell me about the subfloor work. I heard you were doing that duplex on Ridgeway. How'd you hear about that?" Benjamin, I live in a cul-de-sac. Information is the only currency we have. I laughed, and she gave me a careful smile, the kind where you can tell someone is checking whether their face still knows how to do it. We talked about the duplex. We talked about the cost of lumber, which had gone up again. We talked about the neighbor down the street, who'd painted his house yellow without asking anyone, and how Margaret's book club had spent 20 minutes discussing it before anyone opened the actual book. We talked about the pear tree Walt planted, how it hadn't fruited in 2 years, how Margaret was considering having it removed but couldn't bring herself to call anyone about it. We didn't talk about Sarah. Not once, not a glance toward it, not a near miss, not one of those pauses where you can feel the unsaid name pressing against the inside of someone's mouth. Sarah existed in the space between our sentences the way Walt existed in Margaret's verb tenses. Present but uncorrected. There but not addressed. I went back to work after lunch. Dug 2 more holes, set 2 more posts, checked the string line twice. The fence was taking shape. I could see it now, the rhythm of the posts along the property line, evenly spaced, plumb and true. Tomorrow I'd hang the rails and start on the boards. By Wednesday, the fence would be done. 3 days. That's what I'd told her. 3 days, and I'd be out of her yard and back on the duplex, and this would become a thing I did once. A favor for a woman I used to know. That was the plan. Margaret brought sweet tea at 3 o'clock. I was starting to understand the schedule. Coffee at 7:15, sweet tea at 8:30, lunch at 12:15, and then sweet tea again at 3. She didn't ask if I wanted it. She didn't wait to see if I was thirsty. She just appeared on the porch with a glass and set it on the railing and went back to whatever she was doing, which was usually something in the garden, or something in the kitchen, or standing at the window looking at the yard, with a dish towel over her shoulder. Sweet tea was Margaret's language. It was how she said, "I see you working." It was how she said, "Thank you." It was how she said, "Stay," without ever using the word. The next morning was Tuesday. I arrived at 7 again. Margaret had coffee waiting. I got to work on the rails, measuring and cutting 2x4s on the sawhorses I'd set up near the garage. The saw was loud in the quiet street. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The sky was cloudless and the air already warm. Around 10:30, I heard the side gate open. I was kneeling at the 4th post, screwing a rail bracket into place, shirtless and covered in sawdust and sweat, dirt on my arms, dirt on my jeans, a pencil behind my ear that I'd forgotten about. I looked up. A woman was coming through the gate. She was carrying a pot with both hands, the kind of heavy enameled Dutch oven you use for soup or stew. Behind her, a boy trailed with a loaf of bread wrapped in a towel. He was maybe 5 or 6, sandy-haired, holding the bread against his chest like a football. The woman stopped when she saw me. I stopped when I saw her. It was maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3. Long enough for me to register that she was around my age, maybe a couple years younger. Dark hair pulled back, a gray t-shirt with paint on the sleeve, jeans that had been washed enough times to go soft at the knees. Her hands around the pot were steady, and even from 10 feet away, I could see the calluses on her fingers, working hands. Hands that did things. She looked at me the way you look at someone you weren't expecting to find in a place you come to every week. Not startled, just recalibrating. Then she looked at my chest, then at my face, then away. She said hi, and I said it back, and for a second, neither of us moved. I stood up. I was suddenly aware of the sawdust stuck to my stomach, the dirt on my neck, the pencil behind my ear. I reached up and took the pencil out, which didn't help. Margaret appeared on the back porch like she'd been waiting for her cue. "Lena," she said, "come in. Come in." She walked down the steps with a speed I hadn't seen from her in 2 days. She took the pot from the woman's hands. "Oh, this smells wonderful. Is this the Tuesday soup?" "Chicken and dumplings," the woman said. Her voice was low and even. She wasn't smiling, not yet, but she wasn't not smiling either. She had the face of someone who saved her expressions for when they were earned. Margaret turned to me. "Benjamin, this is Lena Park," she said, her voice as casual as if she were listing what she'd had for breakfast. "She lives next door, and she brings me soup on Tuesdays." But there was something underneath the words, something in the way Margaret's eyes moved between us, quick and purposeful, like she was measuring a distance she'd already calculated. "And Lena, this is Benjamin. He's fixing my fence." "Ben," I said. Lena nodded. "Nice to meet you, Ben." The boy peeked out from behind her leg. He was holding the bread with one arm now, the other hand gripping the hem of her shirt. He had her eyes, dark and careful, watching me the way kids watch strangers when they're deciding whether you're safe. "This is my son," Lisa said, "Owen." "Hey, Owen," I said. Owen pressed his face into his mother's hip. Then he looked up again. "Are you building something?" he asked. "Fixing the fence," I said. He looked at the sawhorses, the stacked lumber, the drill on the ground. His eyes went wide the way kids' eyes go wide when they see tools. Like the world had suddenly gotten more interesting. "Can I watch?" "Owen," Lena said, quiet and firm but not mean about it. "It's fine," I said. "He can watch." Lena looked at me for a second. She was deciding something. Whatever it was, she decided it quickly. "He can watch from the porch," she said. Owen looked up at her. She nodded. He handed her the bread and walked to the porch steps and sat down on the second one, above the creek, like he knew which step to avoid. He'd been here before. He knew this porch. Margaret was already headed inside with the soup pot. She paused at the door and looked back at the three of us in her yard. Me standing there shirtless with a drill in one hand and sawdust in my hair. Lena standing by the gate, with bread and paint on her sleeve. Owen sitting on the porch step watching me with his mother's eyes. Something crossed Margtrot's face. Satisfaction isn't the right word. It was more like confirmation. Like she'd placed an order and the delivery had arrived on schedule. She looked at us one more time, something practiced and pleased moving behind her eyes, and then she went inside. I should have noticed right then. The timing. The Tuesday soup that happened to arrive while I was shirtless in the backyard, Margaret's face. When she introduced us, that rehearsed casualness, like she'd practiced the words and the delivery and the exact placement of everyone in the scene. I didn't notice. Or maybe I did, and I let it go. Because Lena was walking toward the porch, and the bread smelled good, and Owen was already asking me what the pencil was for. Lena sat on the porch rail while I went back to work. She didn't talk much. She watched Owen watch me, making sure he stayed on the step, making sure he wasn't in the way. Every few minutes, she'd look over at whatever I was doing, not with curiosity, and not with the polite interest people perform when they don't care, but think they should. She looked like someone who understood what a rail bracket was for. Owen asked 3 questions in 10 minutes. What's that tool? Why's the wood that color? How do you know it's straight? The third one made Lena smile. I saw it from the corner of my eye, small and quick and gone before I could look directly at it. You use a level, I told Owen, and you check it twice. He nodded, like this was important information he needed to remember. Lena stood up after about 15 minutes. We should let you work, she said. It wasn't awkward, it wasn't lingering. She collected Owen, who protested once, and then gave up, and she walked back toward the side gate. At the gate, she stopped and turned around. The fence looks good, she said. Just the post so far. Posts are the hard part, she said. She was right about that. Margaret came out 5 minutes later with sweet tea. She set it on the railing. She looked at the gate where Lena had just left. She looked at me. Lena's a good neighbor, she said. Seems like it, I said. She's been next door for about 2 years. Moved in right after Walt passed. She was the first person to bring food. Didn't knock, just left it on the porch. Margaret picked at a thread on her cardigan. She does that, Margaret said. Shows up. Doesn't make a production out of it. I took a drink of sweet tea. It was cold and too sweet, the way Margaret always made it. Margaret looked at me with an expression I'd seen before but couldn't place. Then I remembered. It was the same expression she'd had when she first met me 5 years ago, when Sarah brought me to Sunday dinner. The look of a woman who'd already decided something and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. She went inside without saying anything else. I stood there in the backyard with sweet tea in my hand and sawdust in my hair, looking at the gate where Lena Park had been standing a minute ago. Lena Park, who brought soup on Tuesdays and had paint on her sleeve, and a son who wanted to know how you make things straight. The afternoon light was shifting. The new fence posts threw long shadows across the yard, parallel lines, stretching toward the neighbor's house, toward Lena's house. I went back to work, but for the rest of the afternoon, every time I looked up, I noticed the gate. And every time Margaret came out with something I hadn't asked for, she looked at it too. The gate bothered me, not the way it hung. The hinges were fine. The latch worked. It was a standard 36-inch cedar gate, nothing special, nothing wrong with it. But it sat in the fence line like it had always been there, and I couldn't figure out why a fence, this rotten, would have a gate that moved this smooth. I didn't think about it long. I had rails to hang and boards to cut, and the afternoon was getting away from me. By 4 o'clock, I'd framed out 2 full panels. The cedar was fresh against the old posts, bright against dark, and the fence was starting to look like something instead of a project. Margaret came out at 4:15 with sweet tea. Late today. She stood on the porch for a minute, looking at my work. She nodded once. Looks like a fence, she said. Getting there, I said. She went inside. I drank the tea and wiped my forehead with the back of my arm. The sun was low enough to turn the yard gold. Shadows were long, I could hear kids playing somewhere down the block, a lawnmower running 2 streets over. The kind of sounds that make a neighborhood feel lived in. I walked the fence line one more time before I packed up for the day. I do that on every job. Walk the line, check the posts, look at the work from a distance. You catch things from 10 feet away that you miss up close. A post that leans, a rail that sags, something that looked straight when you were kneeling next to it, but tilts when you step back. That's when I saw it. The 4th post from the north end. I'd pulled it out that morning and set a new one in its place. The old post was lying in the pile near the garage with the others. I'd already looked at all of them. Rotted, soft, the wood dark and crumbling at the base where it met the ground. But this one was different. The rot didn't start at the bottom the way it should. On every other post, the damage ran from the concrete footing up. Water wicks into the grain from below. The concrete traps moisture against the wood, and over time the base turns soft while the top stays solid. That's normal. That's how fences age. This post was rotted in a ring. About 2 inches above the soil line, the wood was soft and punky in a perfect circle around the post. Below the ring, the wood was still firm. Above the ring, the wood was still firm. Just that band, that 2-inch belt of decay, and when I pressed my thumb into it, the wood crumbled like wet cardboard. I pulled 2 more posts from the pile. Same thing, rot in a ring, not from the base up. I stood there for a minute, looking at the posts laid out in the grass. I've been doing this work for 12 years. I've torn out hundreds of fences. I know what storm damage looks like. I know what neglect looks like. I know what age looks like. This didn't look like any of those things. This looked like someone had soaked the posts, right at the soil line repeatedly over weeks. Water poured against the wood at the same height, over and over, until the grain softened and the post lost its hold in the ground. You wouldn't need to dig anything up. You wouldn't need tools. You'd just need a garden hose and patience. A lot of patience. I looked at the house. Margaret's kitchen window was lit. I could see her moving behind the curtain, doing something at the counter, probably wiping it down. She wiped the counters 4 times a day. I looked at the garden hose, coiled by the back steps. I looked at the fence posts. I didn't say anything that evening. I loaded my tools into the truck. I told Margaret I'd be back in the morning. She nodded and said she'd have coffee, same as always. The 3rd step creaked when I went down, same as always. But I sat in the truck for a long time before I started the engine. If this story is making you think about someone who saw you before you saw yourself, you are in the right place. There are more stories like this one on the channel. Wednesday morning, I was back at 7. Coffee on the railing, sun coming up over the roofline, cardinals in the bird bath. I got to work on the fence boards, measuring and cutting and screwing them to the rails, and I didn't say anything about the posts because I wasn't sure what to say. Around 9 o'clock, Owen appeared. He came through the side gate alone this time, wearing a red t-shirt and cargo shorts and sneakers with the laces untied. He walked straight to the sawhorses and stood there, watching me cut a board with the circular saw. I turned off the saw. "Hey, buddy. Mom said I could come watch if I stayed on the porch," he said. He didn't go to the porch. He stood next to the sawhorses, 2 feet from the sawdust pile, looking at the drill on the ground. "Can I hold something?" he asked. I gave him a handful of screws. "Hold these for me," I said. "I'll ask for them one at a time." He held the screws in both hands, like they were coins. He followed me to the fence, and when I put my hand out, he placed one screw in my palm, careful, like he was performing surgery. We did this for 20 minutes. Owen handed me screws, and I drove them into the boards, and he watched each one go in, with the same focused expression his mother had when she'd looked at the rail bracket. "You're good at this," I told him. He nodded and puffed his chest out a little. "I'm 5, he said. I told him I figured. "I can count to 1,000, he said. "That's a lot." He picked up a piece of cut cedar from the ground and turned it over in his hands, sniffed it, put it down, picked up another one. Margaret came out at 8:30 with sweet tea. She saw Owen and her face did that thing again, that confirmation look. She brought a glass of juice for him without anyone asking and set it on the bottom step. "Owen," she said, "come sit and drink this." He went and sat on the second step above the creek, same as last time. He drank the juice while Margaret stood in the doorway and watched us both, her arms crossed, her mouth in a straight line that wasn't a frown. It was restraint, the face of someone trying not to smile too wide. I worked through the morning. Owen went home around 10 when Lena called his name from the other side of the fence. He waved at me once and slipped through the gate. I heard Lena's voice on the other side, low and even, asking him something I couldn't make out. By noon, I had half the boards up. The fence was taking real shape now, a wall of fresh cedar running along the property line, golden in the sunlight, smelling like something new. Lena came through the gate at 12:30. She wasn't carrying soup. She was carrying a casserole dish covered in foil, and behind her Owen had a paper bag with rolls in it. Store-bought rolls, not homemade, and she held the casserole like she wanted me to know she didn't think this was a big deal. Margaret was already at the back door. "Lena," she said, "perfect timing, I just set the table." She'd set 3 places this time. 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 cloth napkins ironed with creases, and she'd set them without hesitation. Like the math had been right from the start, and it was the world that had been counting wrong. We ate at the oak table. The casserole was chicken and rice, nothing fancy, salt and pepper and garlic, and a lid of melted cheese on top. Lena sat across from me. Owen sat next to his mother, his feet swinging because they didn't reach the floor. Margaret sat at her end of the table. Walt's chair was empty at the other end, angled toward her. "This is good," I said to Lena. "The chicken." "Thank you," she said. And then, after a beat, "It's the only thing I make that Owen will eat without negotiation." Owen looked up from his plate. "That's not true," he said. "I eat apples." Lena glanced at me sideways. "Apples," she said, as if that proves his range. I laughed. She almost did. Her mouth moved, but she caught it, the way someone catches a door that's swinging open before they're ready. Margaret watched us from her end of the table and said nothing. She ate her chicken and rice, and she watched. After lunch, I went back to the fence. Lena stayed. I could hear her voice through the kitchen window, talking to Margaret while Owen played in the yard. He'd found a stick and was hitting it against things. The bird bath, the porch railing, the raised garden beds. Lena told him to stop hitting Margaret's garden, and he stopped for about 30 seconds and then started hitting the pear tree, which seemed acceptable to everyone. Around 2 o'clock, Lena walked out to the fence. Owen was on the porch steps with Margaret, the two of them doing something with a piece of string. Margaret was teaching him a knot, a bowline, from the look of it. Walt had been Navy. Lena stood near the section I was working on. She watched me drive screws for a minute. "You're fast," she said. "I do this for a living," I said. "I know." She paused. "I used to do drywall before Owen came along." I looked at her. "You hung drywall?" She nodded and held up her hands, palms out, showing me the calluses. 2 years after college, on my dad's crew, mudding and taping. That explained it. The way she'd looked at the rail bracket. The way she'd said, "Posts are the hard part." She knew what she was looking at because she'd done the work. I went back to the fence board. She stayed. We didn't talk for a while, and it was the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. The comfortable, the kind where two people are just being in the same place without performing anything for each other. "My dad's crew did a lot of residential," she said after a while. "Small stuff. Renovations. He always said the fence was the last thing people fix, and the first thing they should. Why's that?" "Because a fence decides who's in and who's out," she said. "And most people put it up without thinking about which side they're standing on." I looked at the fence boards under my hands. Fresh cedar, tight grain. The screws sunk flush with the surface. I looked at the gate in the middle of the line, the gate with the smooth hinges that didn't match anything else. Margaret came out at 3 o'clock. Sweet tea, right on schedule. She brought a glass for Lena, too. The three of us stood in the yard, and Margaret looked at the fence, at the new boards bright against the old posts, and her face was soft in a way I hadn't seen all week. "It's looking beautiful," Margaret said. I set my glass on the porch railing. "Margaret," I said, "can I ask you something?" She looked at me and waited. "The posts," I said, "the ones I pulled out, the rot pattern is wrong." Her face didn't change, not a flinch, not a blink. She took a sip of tea. "Wrong how?" she asked, and her voice was steady, but her eyes moved to the garden hose by the back steps, just for a second, and I saw it, and she knew I saw it. "The rot is in a ring," I said. 2 inches above the soil line, uniform around each post. That doesn't happen from a storm. It doesn't happen from age. It happens from water. A lot of water applied in the same spot over a long time. Margaret looked at me over her glass. She looked at Lena, who was standing near the gate with her own glass, watching this conversation, like someone watching a door open. Then Margaret looked at the pear tree, the one Walt planted, the one that hadn't fruited in 2 years. "I watered them," she said, "the posts." She said it the way she said everything. Flat and direct, like announcing what was for lunch. "Every evening for about 6 weeks," she said, "after the sprinklers went off. A few minutes with the hose, right at the base, right where the wood meets the dirt." She took another sip of tea. It wasn't hard. The posts were already old. They just needed a push. The yard was quiet. Owen had stopped hitting the pear tree. He was sitting on the steps with the piece of string in his lap, looking at us. "Margaret," I said, and I didn't know how to finish the sentence. She set her glass down on the railing next to mine. "Walt would have done this," she said. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it shifted, tightened, like the guitar string I'd heard in her voice the day before. "If he were here, he would have called you himself. He would have thought of some reason to get you back to this house, and he would have made it happen because that's what Walt did. He built things between people, connections. He was better at it than I ever was." She looked at the empty chair through the kitchen window. "But he's not here," she said, "so I did what I could. I didn't say anything. Lena didn't say anything." Margaret turned to me, and her eyes were dry and clear, and full of something I recognize now. The expression I'd seen at the funeral, the one I couldn't name. It was intention, grief shaped into purpose. A woman who'd lost the person who held her world together and decided to hold it together herself. Not by closing the door, but by opening it wider. "The year after Walt died," she said, "I had two choices. I could sit in this house and talk to his chair, or I could keep setting the table." She looked at the three of us in her yard. Her hand went to the porch railing and rested there, near the two glasses. "I kept setting the table," she said. "I just needed people to sit at it." Lena's glass was at her mouth, but she wasn't drinking. She was looking at Margaret the way you look at someone when you suddenly understand something you'd only guessed at before. I looked at the fence. My fence. The fence I'd been hired to fix, except it hadn't broken on its own. A 63-year-old woman had taken a garden hose and stood in her backyard every evening for 6 weeks and watered the base of each post until the wood softened and the storm did the rest. She hadn't called 3 contractors who wanted $4,000. She'd called me. I should have been angry, or at least annoyed. She'd lied. She'd manipulated me into coming here, into spending 3 days in her yard, into being shirtless when Lena showed up with Tuesday soup, but standing in her backyard with sweet tea in my hand and sawdust on my jeans and Owen watching from the porch steps. And Lena standing by the gate that didn't match anything else. I couldn't find the anger. I couldn't even find the annoyance. All I could find was the woman who'd taught me to cook and remembered my birthday and called me Benjamin like a street. She used. The woman who'd lost her husband and kept his chair angled toward hers and set the table for people who hadn't arrived yet. "Margaret," I said. She raised her eyebrows, waiting. "You could have just asked me to come over," I said. She smiled, and it was small and real, the kind where you can tell the person hasn't used it in a while and is surprised it still works. "I did," she said. "I called you on a Monday. You came on a Tuesday, and you're still here on a Wednesday." She picked up her glass and walked inside. The screen door closed behind her. The third step didn't creak because she hadn't gone down the steps. Lena was looking at me. "Did you know?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "But I'm not surprised," she said. The afternoon was getting late. The sun was dropping, new, and the new fence boards were throwing shadows across the grass, long strips of light and dark, like piano keys laid flat. Owen had gotten down from the porch and was walking along the fence, running his hand over the boards, feeling the grain. Lena watched him for a moment, then looked at me. "She told me about Walt," Lena said. "A lot." When I first moved in, I'd bring soup on Tuesdays, and she'd talk about him for an hour. She looked at the kitchen window where Margaret had disappeared. She always said he was the kind of man who noticed people, who didn't just see them, but paid attention. I nodded. She said you were like that, Lena said, quiet but present. She said that? She talks about you, Ben. She's been talking about you since I moved in. She never told me she was going to do this, but I've been hearing about you for 2 years. I stood there with the drill in one hand and a fence screw in the other, and I didn't know what to do with my face. So I looked at the fence. I should finish the boards before I lose the light, I said. Lena nodded. She called Owen, and he came running, sawdust on his knees and cedar shavings in his hair. She lifted him over the fence at the low section near the gate, and he laughed. A bright sudden sound in the quiet yard, and Lena's hand stayed on his shoulder as they walked toward their own back door. At their door, she stopped. "I'm making pasta tomorrow," she said. "If you want." She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at Owen's shoelaces. "That sounds good," I said. She went inside. Owen waved once through the window. I waved back. I drove screws until the light went orange, and the shadows swallowed the yard. Margaret didn't come out again, but at some point, I noticed a second porch light had come on. Not the one over Margaret's back door, the one over Lena's. Thursday morning, I woke up before the alarm. That never happens. I'm a snooze button person, always have been. But I was standing in my kitchen at 5:45, pouring coffee into a travel mug and thinking about hinges. The gate hinges. The ones that didn't match anything else on the fence. Smooth, oiled, quiet, sitting in a fence line full of rot and rust. They'd been replaced. Recently, someone had taken the old hinges off and put new ones on, and they'd done it before the posts came down, before the storm, before any of it. Margaret had put a gate in a fence she was planning to destroy. She'd made sure the passage between her yard and Lena's would survive. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a minute, holding my coffee, and I thought about a 63-year-old woman standing in her backyard with a garden hose every evening for 6 weeks, watering fence posts. She'd done it while the sun went down and the sprinklers clicked off and the neighborhood settled into its routines, and she'd oiled a set of gate hinges so that when everything else fell apart, the opening would still work. I'm a carpenter. I understand structural thinking. I understand what it means to know which piece is load-bearing before you start tearing things down. Margaret hadn't just sabotaged a fence. She'd designed a collapse. I drove to Claremont, left on Maple, right on Broad, through 2 lights, the route I'd driven 100 times. The trees, the mailboxes, the crack near the Hendersons' place. Same as always. But this morning, the familiarity felt different. Not like a place I was visiting, like a place I was returning to. Margaret had coffee on the railing when I pulled up. 7:15. "Last day," she said from the porch. "Last post," I said. "Then the cap rail. Then you've got a fence." She nodded. She was wearing the blue cardigan again. Sleeves pushed up. She looked smaller than she had on Monday. Or maybe I was just seeing her more clearly now, all 5 feet and 4 inches of her. This woman who'd orchestrated a 4-day reunion, using a garden hose and a rotted fence and a pot of Tuesday soup. I got to work. The last post went in at the north end of the property line, near the corner where the fence met the neighbor's chain link on the other side. I dug the hole, set the post, mixed the concrete, checked it plumb, 18 inches below grade. The rule. The post stood straight and pale against the morning, fresh cedar catching the light. I ran my hand over the top of it. Smooth, solid. This post would last 20 years if someone sealed it. By noon, the cap rail was on, and every board was screwed tight. I walked the line one more time, checking the string, eyeing the tops, and every line was straight and plumb and true. 40 feet of cedar running along the back of Margaret's yard, golden in the sunlight. The gate in the middle, with its smooth hinges and its latch that clicked clean. I stood back and looked at it. It was a good fence, not complicated, not fancy, just solid. The kind of thing that does its job and doesn't announce itself. Margaret came out at 12:15. Turkey sandwiches again, cloth napkins, pickle on the side. "Finished?" she asked. I nodded. She looked at the fence for a long time. Then she looked at the pear tree. The one Walt planted the year their second daughter was born. The one that hadn't fruited in 2 years. There were buds on it, small, tight, pale green. I hadn't noticed them Monday. Maybe they hadn't been there Monday, or maybe I'd been too busy pulling rotted posts out of the ground to look up. Margaret saw me notice. "Started last week," she said. "I almost called you about it. Then I decided to let it do its thing." She said it the way she said everything. Flat, matter of fact. But she was looking at the buds the way you look at something you'd stopped believing in. That showed up anyway. We ate lunch on the porch. Owen came through the gate around 1 o'clock. He walked straight to the fence and put both hands on a board and pushed, testing it. "It's strong," he said. "It's cedar," I said. He nodded like this, explained everything. He followed me around the yard while I packed up my tools. He carried the level for me, holding it with both hands across his body like a sword. He put it in the truck bed and then stood there watching me coil the extension cord. "Ben," he said. "Yeah, buddy. Are you going to come back and fix other things?" I stopped coiling. He was standing there in his red t-shirt with sawdust on his knees, looking at me with those dark, careful eyes that were exactly his mother's. His shoelaces were untied. His hands were at his sides. He wasn't asking the way kids ask for ice cream, casual and forgettable. He was asking the way kids ask when they've been watching closely and they need to know if the person they've been watching is staying or leaving. I've been around enough job sites to know that buildings don't care when you leave. You frame a wall, you hang the drywall, you move on to the next address. The wall doesn't ask if you're coming back. But Owen wasn't a wall. "I think so," I said, "if your mom's okay with that." He nodded once, the same way Margaret nodded, decisive and brief, like the answer had been decided before the question. Then he ran back through the gate to his own yard. Lena was in the doorway when I looked up. She'd been standing there. I don't know how long. 6:30, she said. "I'll be there," I said. I went home and showered. I put on a clean shirt, a dark blue one that I hadn't worn in months because I never go anywhere that requires a clean shirt. I stood in my bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror, and I thought about the last time I'd done this. gotten ready for dinner at someone's house. And it had been Margaret's house, years ago, back when Sarah and I were together, and Sunday dinner was a thing I did, and I didn't know how good I had it. I drove back to Claremont at 6:15. The sun was low, and the street was golden, and Margaret's porch light was on. Lena's porch light was on too, the same one I'd noticed last night. I went to Lena's front door. It felt strange, walking up a different set of steps on the same street. Her house was smaller than Margaret's. Green siding, white trim, a bike with training wheels on the porch. A pair of rain boots by the door, Owen's size. She opened the door, and she was wearing a black sweater with the sleeves pushed up, and her hair was down. I'd only seen it pulled back before, tight and practical, the way you wear it when you're working. Down, it changed her face, softened something I hadn't realized was sharp. "Come in," she said. Her kitchen was small and warm and smelled like garlic and tomato sauce. Owen was at the table drawing with crayons, a picture of something that might have been a truck or might have been a dinosaur. Possibly both. He looked up and waved. "I brought wine," I said, red. Lena took it and set it on the counter. She opened a drawer and pulled out a corkscrew, and I noticed her hands again, the calluses, the short nails, the steadiness. Hands that had hung drywall and stirred soup and held a 5-year-old's hand crossing the street. We ate pasta at her kitchen table. Spaghetti with meat sauce, garlic bread, a salad she'd thrown together. Owen ate his pasta plain with butter and informed us that tomato sauce was suspicious. Lena told him suspicious was a big word, and he said Margaret taught him. Of course she did. After dinner, Owen went to the living room to watch something on the tablet. I could hear the muffled sounds of a cartoon through the wall. Lena poured more wine. We sat at the table in the kitchen, with the dishes between us and the window behind her, showing the last of the daylight going purple over the rooftops. "I should tell you something," she said. She wrapped both hands around her wine glass. "I didn't move here by accident," she said. "I moved here because of Margaret." She looked at the table. Owen's father left when Owen was 8 months old. No warning, no conversation, just a note on the counter and an empty closet. I was 27 with an infant and a lease I couldn't afford and a degree I'd never used because I'd been hanging drywall with my dad since graduation. She took a sip of wine. My dad knew Margaret from the hardware store. He'd done some work on her house years ago, back when Walt was alive. After Owen's father left, my dad called Margaret because he didn't know who else to call. I was a wreck, not eating, not sleeping, just carrying Owen around the apartment in the dark because I couldn't put him down. Her voice was steady, not flat, not performing steadiness, just the voice of someone who'd told this story to herself enough times that the edges were worn smooth. "Margaret drove to my apartment," she said. She'd never met me, only knew my dad, and that was enough. She showed up with banana bread, and she sat on my couch, and she held Owen for 2 hours while I slept. Then she left, and the next week she came back, and the week after that, she looked up at me. When the house next door went up for rent, she called my dad. She said she had a spare bedroom she could help furnish, and a yard with a garden, and a neighbor who wouldn't bother me, but would keep the porch light on. She said it without blinking. The porch light. The one I'd noticed last night and tonight. The one Margaret kept on. "I've been here 2 years," Lena said. "Owen thinks of Margaret as his grandmother. She taught him to tie knots and count to 1,000, and she tells him stories about Walt like he's coming home from a trip." She paused. She never told me she was planning the fence thing. "But she's been talking about you since I moved in. She said you were the best thing about her daughter's life, and her daughter had been too young to know it." I sat there with my wine, and I didn't have anything smart to say. So I said the true thing. "I almost didn't answer the phone," I said. Lena looked at me. "It was Monday when she called," I said. "I was on a job site. My phone buzzed, and I saw her name, and I almost let it go to voicemail. Because I'd been letting it go for 2 years. Not her calls, she hadn't called. Everything. I'd been letting everything go. Margaret, the house, Sunday dinners, all of it. Because I thought losing Sarah meant I'd lost the right to those things." I turned the wine glass on the table. "Margaret was the only family that chose me," I said. "My parents are fine. They're just not close. They love me the way you love a painting in the hallway. But Margaret chose me. She chose to teach me to cook and remember my birthday. And call me Benjamin like it was a name worth saying slowly. And when Sarah and I ended, I walked away from all of it because I thought that's what you do. You lose the person, you lose the people." Lena was quiet for a minute. The cartoon sounds leaked through the wall. Outside, the streetlight clicked on. "But you answered," she said. I nodded. She reached across the table and put her hand on my wrist. Not grabbing, not squeezing, just resting there, her calluses against my skin. "She kept the table set," Lena said. 2 years. She never stopped setting your place." We sat there for a while. Her hand on my wrist, the dishes on the table, Owen's crayon drawing taped to the refrigerator behind her, the truck dinosaur watching over us both. I helped her clean up. We did the dishes side by side, at the sink, me washing, her drying, and we didn't talk much because we didn't need to. Some conversations finish themselves. The words run out, and what's left is just 2 people, standing close enough to feel the warmth off each other's arms. Owen came in and said he was tired, and Lena scooped him up and carried him down the hallway. I heard her voice through the door, low and gentle, reading something. I stood in her kitchen with a dish towel in my hands, and I listened to her put her son to bed. And I felt something unlock in my chest, a door I'd been leaning against for 2 years, swinging open, not with force, just with the gentle pressure of someone on the other side who'd been waiting. She came back. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "Thank you for fixing the fence," she said. "I didn't fix it, I replaced it." She smiled. It was the first full smile I'd seen from her, not the quick ones she caught before they got too wide. A real one, the kind where her whole face changed and her eyes went warm, and I understood, standing in her kitchen with a dish towel and an empty wine glass, that I was in serious trouble. I walked out to the porch into warm night air, crickets singing in the hedges, and the streetlight humming above the yard. I looked over at Margaret's house. The kitchen light was on. She was sitting at the oak table. I could see her through the window, sitting in her chair, facing Walt's empty chair at the other end. But on the table, in front of her, were 2 mugs of sweet tea, both of them full. She wasn't drinking from one and putting the other back. They were both there, side by side on the table, and she was sitting with them like she was waiting for someone. Or like she wasn't waiting anymore, like she'd finally stopped waiting and started trusting that the chairs would fill themselves. 2 mugs, both full. I got in my truck. I sat there for a minute, the way I'd sat there on Monday, hands on the wheel, engine off. But Monday, I'd been holding my breath. Tonight, I was just sitting. Lena's porch light was still on. Margaret's porch light was still on. I started the engine and pulled out of the cul-de-sac. Left on Claremont through 2 lights, right on Broad, left on Maple. Same route, same trees, same mailboxes, same crack in the sidewalk near the Hendersons' place. I'd driven this road 100 times. Going to Margaret's for Sunday dinner. Going to Margaret's for birthday cake. Going to Margaret's because she called and said, "Come stir," and I went. Because that's what you do when someone chooses you. But the road felt different tonight. Not the pavement, not the turns. Something in the way I was driving it. Like the route had always been leading somewhere I couldn't see until now, and I'd just been too far away to read the sign. Found family isn't the family you're born into. It's the family that sets a place for you at the table before you've earned it, before you deserve it, before you even know the table exists. It's the woman who teaches you to cook and calls you by your full name and remembers your birthday every year. It's the woman who shows up with banana bread to an apartment where a stranger is falling apart because someone asked her to. And she said yes. And sometimes it's the woman who takes a garden hose to her own fence because she knows you won't come back unless you have a reason. Unless someone gives you a door to walk through. Margaret once told me that Walt's favorite thing about their house was the porch. Not the kitchen, not the bedroom, not the garden. The porch. Because the porch is the place between inside and outside. It's where you stand when you're deciding whether to stay or go. And Walt believed that if you made the porch warm enough, people would always choose to stay. I think he was right. I pulled into my apartment complex. I turned off the engine. I sat there for a minute in the quiet. Then I picked up my phone and I called Margaret. She answered on the first ring. "Benjamin," she said. "I have a question," I said. She waited. "That third porch step," I said. "The one that creaks. You want me to fix it Saturday?" She was quiet for a second. Then she made a sound that might have been a laugh. Or might have been something else. Something that had been sitting in her chest for 14 months and was finally finding its way out. "I'll have coffee," she said. And then she hung up, because Margaret has never been much for goodbyes. I sat in my truck in the dark, and I smiled, and I thought about porch steps and pear trees and sweet tea, and a gate with smooth hinges in a fence that was built to fall down. I thought about a boy who held screws like surgery, and a woman whose smile changed her whole face, and a 63-year-old who watered fence posts because the love of her life used to build bridges between people, and she'd be damned if she let that stop just because he was gone. I thought about how you can drive the same road 100 times. And then one evening you notice that it's been taking you home the whole time. You just weren't ready to see it. I went inside. I made coffee. I opened the kitchen drawer and found the napkin, the one where Margaret had written the recipe for her beef stew. 3 bay leaves, not 2. Take them out after 40 minutes, or they turn bitter. I read it twice and put it back. Saturday, I'd fix the porch step, and maybe after that, there'd be something else. A leaky faucet, a stuck window, a shelf that needed hanging. The kind of small repairs that keep you coming back to a house until you realize you've stopped leaving. Some people see you before you see yourself. That's what Margaret did. She saw me standing in the back row at Walt's funeral in a suit that didn't fit. And she saw me standing in Lena's kitchen with a dish towel. And she saw me before either of those things. Years ago, the first time I sat at her table, and she handed me a wooden spoon and said, "Come stir." She saw all of it, and she set the table anyway. There are more stories like this on the channel. I'll see you in the next one.